Well. Welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific, brought to you by our producer, IEJ Media, and our sponsor, Our Group Asia. We'll talk more about them in due course. I'm the former military officer, Ray Powell in California. Down there in Arizona, that's Jim Caruso, the former diplomat. Jim, how are you?
I'm well, and I'm reminded today that there's so much going on. We always have something new to talk about. And the question is how we divide the urgent from the merely critical.
Yeah, right. And I think the things happening in the Philippines recently may be both, depending on who you are and where you sit. So in order to help us understand some of what's been going on down there or over there, we have my friend Regina Lay. Reggie, she is a broadcast journalist and news anchor in the Philippines. I used to go on the show that she used to co-host called The Big Story. We'll talk about what she's up to later on in the program. But right now, we want her to help us understand what exactly is going on in the political situation in the Philippines. So let's go back in time. Reggie,
I don't know what's going on either. I feel like the year started and I just haven't come up for a year since. I mean, if it's not one thing, it's another thing, and it's only March too.
Welcome to our world, Reggie.
All right. Yeah, right. Yeah, nothing like that happening in Washington, D.C.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So, all right. Well, let's go back in time a little bit. July 2022, there was an election, and the president elect was Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., and his vice president was Sara Duterte, and they were elected president and vice president on a, quote, Uniteam ticket. So all was good. They were running as a team. 2 years later, Vice President Duterte formally broke with Marcos. She resigned from her cabinet positions, and by February of this year had been impeached by the Philippine House of Representatives for, among other charges, plotting to assassinate the president. Meanwhile, her father, former President Rodrigo Duterte, was just apprehended in Manila and, with President Marcos's cooperation, handed over to the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity associated with his presidency's war on drugs. Reggie Lay, what's going on? How did this dynastic feud between the Marcoses and the Dutertes start, and why should we care about it?
There's a couple of theories on how exactly it started, but if one of the more persistent theories is that it was because it started when she was denied the cabinet position that she wanted, which is defense, right? She had asked for it. She had been vocal about it through even as early as the campaign period. Instead, she was given defense. Instead she was given education, right? Which is, not a small portfolio by any means, but it wasn't what she wanted, and she had her heart set on defense, and that's when it started unraveling. Although for the better part of for the next year after that, they did put in an effort to try to make up to try to put out a united front and try to make it seem like all was okay in their alliance, right? And that's where it began, and it feels towards the end that as we went along, it felt more like she was being sidelined in his cabinet, and it wasn't the equal partnership that they had struck at the very start. One thing that probably a lot of people looking at this from the outside don't know or don't remember is that Bongbong Marcos didn't really have much of a chance at the presidency until Sara gave way, because in the polls she was leading, and she was wishy-washy about whether she was going to run for the top job. And it wasn't until I don't remember exactly how late before the elections, but at some point, just maybe a few months before the elections, that's when she decided, okay, I'll go for the vice presidency instead and let Bongbong Marcos run for chief executive. And her reasoning at that time was that she has young kids, and she does, right? She had maybe toddlers at that point in time. and she didn't want the stress of running the whole country by herself. And so uh yeah, and so she gave way, and that's when the two of them won by a landslide. And I guess if you were to put yourself in her shoes and think about it, right? I gave you the presidency is how I would see it, right? You're nothing if not because of me, if not because of me giving way to you. And so I guess there would be a lot of unhappiness on her part over the way her and her family have been treated. Uh, which brings us to today, right? You've got Duterte sitting there in detention center at the International Criminal Court, and the reason this matters is because this is going to be a test case essentially for the ICC, which, as you may know, has not had a lot of high-profile wins lately. I mean, there's outstanding warrants of arrest out for Bibi Netanyahu and even Vladimir Putin. And so far they haven't been able to capture any of these men. These men are still very much in power, right? And this is I guess, also he's the first Asian leader to actually, be captured, be arrested by the International Criminal Court. So this is going to be a landmark case, in that it's going to set the precedent for a lot of uh rules and laws that will govern the ICC and international law moving forward.
I guess what I find surprising is this ratchets it up the tension and the feud even higher. Is that the goal of Marcos, just to create a real crisis, to have a showdown?
Some people think that yes, it may be this is a ruthless way of going about it, which is to say, take out the whole family and just make them not a factor or a contender at all in the coming elections, right? In the 2020 presidential elections. I'm not convinced. He just doesn't strike me as that kind of ruthless politician. Uh, he doesn't have the killer instinct, I would say, and the rough and tumble uh uh personality that Duterte had. Duterte, if the roles had been reversed, I would have thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's totally something that Duterte would do. But Marcos, I'm still not 100% convinced. What I will say though is he is a person who really puts a lot of weight on the international rules-based order. Ironically enough, I know the history, like everyone knows the history of the Marcos family. But uh, so far in his term, since he's been president, he's actually become, strangely enough, a stalwart of the international rules-based order. I mean, he goes around the world preaching about, rule of law. And as far as the China incursions are concerned in the South China Sea, right? And now this, and I do believe it came to a point wherein, okay, here comes the Interpol. They've got a warrant of arrest out. They've got all the documentation, and he was told, um, hand Duterte over, right? And uh, when he gave the press conference right after that arrest, he said as much. He said, "Listen, I mean, I had no choice because we rely on the Interpol for a lot of things. We've asked them to bring back fugitives for us, and now it's
But you
our
believe
turn."
that it wasn't Marcos who instigated this? It was all from the ICC?
No, now we know that this could not have happened in such a swift manner without his government's cooperation. We know that for sure at this point. Um, However, I also believe that if the Uniteam alliance hadn't broken up, that the arrest warrant would have come for him at some point anyways, right? It just would not have been so dramatic. It just would not have, maybe they would have, the Marcos administration, if they were still friendly with the Dutertes, they would have dragged their feet and, tried to find some workaround to it. They certainly would not have had a Gulfstream sitting at the airbase ready to whisk him away, right, within the same day. So, yeah.
So let's just to kind of cover down on the facts. Starting with Rodrigo Duterte, what is he being charged with, and how would you assess the ICC's case against him? Do you think it's a solid case, or do you think this could be a real problematic case?
So he's been charged with crimes against humanity, which the ICC specializes in. For other crimes, there's I mean, they really focus on genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity, right? And the fact that they've come out with an arrest warrant instead of a summons tells you that they actually believe there is reasonable grounds to charge this man with with crimes against humanity, specifically of murder, right, during the bloody war on drugs. So I think, and also because this is they've been working on this case, the victims of the killings, the church workers, the some of the people from the academia, they've been working on this case for 7, 8 years now. So although the timing of it all is suspect, actually there's been a lot of legwork put in even before Marcos came to power. Um, to me, well, and at this point they're drilling down on the 43 cases. Uh, uh, 43
Sorry, 43.
43 victims, 43 cases, right? That's
So they have
what's
43 of specific cases that they're
43
focused on.
specific cases, and a lot of the Duterte trolls are jumping on that number, saying, well, that's not a crime against humanity. That's just 43 people over what, period of 8 years. But they missed the point. The point being that these are just a representative sample of all of the killings that happened under Duterte, and what the court is trying to determine is if there was a pattern, and they've already said so in the warrant that they believe there's a widespread and systematic attack on civilians during Duterte's time, first as mayor and then as president. So I feel like obviously all the human rights workers we've spoken to and some lawyers as well believe the case is airtight. However, here comes a guy named Nicholas Kaufman, who Duterte had just hired to be his lead defense counsel. And Nicholas Kaufman is a British Israeli ICC accredited lawyer. And we were looking him up, and turns out, he's he likes to represent what's one word to describe all of them? Controversial figures, to be kind about it. So he's, for instance, represented the family of the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. He's represented the Vice President of Congo, Pierre Memba. Again, these are all charges of crimes against humanity, right? And what we believe will happen is that they will right away contest the legality of the arrest. And apparently this Kaufman guy is is known to aggressively contest procedural matters. This being The Hague, they are very sensitive to, the following, to doing everything by the book and making sure that all the bases are covered, and they accord the suspect his rights. They follow due process and all of that. And I believe, and he's already said so last night actually, that they are planning to contest the way by which he was arrested. So yeah.
Is this in the Philippines seen as a political or a criminal case?
Oh, very much a political case, right? So it's become a battle of propaganda out here, social media, and I guess everywhere else. But mostly social media. It's been so noisy and toxic, right? And whatever else they say, there are people obviously who try to be the voice of reason. A lot of lawyers and academics who try to put at the forefront the stories of the extrajudicial killing victims, right, and their families, to try to bring it back to the fore, especially journalists as well. People that I know that have covered all 6 years of the bloody drug war, they're trying to put back into the center of the conversation the stories of the families. But I don't think the vast majority of people are buying it. They just see this as, Marcos uh trying to take out the Dutertes in anticipation of the next election. And actually, and you know what they say, right? It's in every war, the first casualty is always the truth. And it's really become a war of narratives, right? Is Marcus the hero here because he's shown the world that he will abide by an international rules-based order and he will not stand in the way of justice, or is he the villain who gave up a Filipino citizen to a foreign court even though the country is not subscribed to that court anymore? Right. And now you see, and you see a lot of trolling both sides. Yeah.
Well, before this happened, the most interesting Duterte Marcos news had to do with the impeachment of the vice president. And so that actually, a peek behind the curtain for our listeners, we actually tried to do a podcast all about that. But we had some technical difficulties more severe than Jim not knowing where the mute button was. And we had to do this all over. And so in between when we did that one and this one, we've had all of this ICC stuff happen. So, Reggie, going back to the impeachment, okay, what is this impeachment about? How did it start? And where are we going with it?
So the impeachment is well, first of all, the Vice President, Sara Duterte, has been impeached by the House of Congress. She just hasn't been convicted. And it all has to do with her use of confidential funds, right? Confidential funds are secret funds, essentially, that agencies use for security or military purposes, right? That's why they're secret and that's why they're audited a different way. The irony here is that it was Congress who handed her the secret funds, right? It was Congress. Congress has the power of the purse, and so it approves the budget of every single agency. And then back in 2022, 2023, again, when the Uniteam, when the alliance was still intact, Congress handed over, a check. No questions asked. They approved her budget in 20 minutes without asking a single question of what she's planning to use it for. And, excuse me. And then here comes 2024 when the partnership has disintegrated and, suddenly she's thrust in this position where she has to defend every single item in her budget. And so why did it start? So it started with that. There, as we go along, as we continue probing this issue, there does seem to be a lot of questionable things on that. For instance, the use of clearly fake names. A lot of the acknowledgement receipts on the confidential funds were made with either forged signatures, fake names, people that don't exist on the registry, on the national registry. Um, and where is it going? It's going to trial by June 30 when the next Congress kicks in, because we've got elections coming up in on May 12th. And so by the time this actually goes to trial, it'll be with with a new Congress. So yeah, I don't know how we don't yet know how this ICC arrest is going to impact that, whether that's going to send a signal to the Congress to, hey, speed things up a bit. We'll see. So far, they're sticking to the timeline, which is end of January. Sorry, end of June. End of June. Yeah.
So what does this imply for the Philippine political stability going forward and the continuation of the system?
Oh, well, it implies that it's going to be very chaotic for a little bit, I guess. I mean, at least politically. We're all just collateral damage here, right? The already you've got economists warning that this could mean Congress being tied up with all these things could mean that important reforms are, put on the back burner, or not some of the ones that have already been passed, then maybe not implemented in the most efficient way possible, right? Um, and there's just there's just going to be the perception for a while that I guess politically it's going to be noisy for a little bit. I guess it also depends on the makeup of the next Congress. If Marcus is the candidates that he backed, if most of them win, then I guess you could argue as well that that's continuity in a way, right? He's gonna they will be expected to pass all legislation and push forward all the measures that he wants. But if that doesn't happen, then that may be a question mark as well. Yeah.
So so potentially looking ahead, under Philippine law, if you are impeached, then you are disqualified then from running for higher office in the future, right? She could
That's
not
right.
then later run as
That's right.
president. So
Yeah.
potentially you'd have the former president either at the Hague, maybe serving a sentence even, and then the other very prominent Duterte ineligible.
Yeah.
But let me go back because we didn't bury the lead, but we haven't talked about one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning, which was this quote, this alleged plot to assassinate President Marcos.
Mm.
Tell us and our audience a little bit about what that was, how it happened. Things got a little weird.
Yeah, things got very weird. It was a middle of the night, well, late night, impromptu press conference that when she said all of that. Hang on a second. And that was at the height of the congressional hearings into her confidential funds and was brought on by her assistant, this I can't remember her first name. Zuleika. It was her assistant at the office of the vice president. Lopez. That's right, Attorney Lopez, who got put in front of the House panel, and they were trying to grill her and trying to get some answers out of her, and what happened to the funds and who did you spend what or who did you spend it on, et cetera, et cetera. And the congressmen felt they weren't getting the right answers or getting real answers from this Attorney Lopez, and so they detained her, right? They put her, and they have the power to do that. I just can't remember if it's they can only detain people within, whether it's 48 hours or more than that. In any case, they can cite somebody in contempt and detain them for obstruction of justice and refusing to cooperate with the House of Congress. And so they did just that. And that's when I guess Sarah went ballistic, right? Because this was her close-in aide. This is someone that she's very close to. And so she tried to visit this Attorney Lopez in detention. But I don't remember anymore whether she was able to. I don't think she was able to get in. Or yes, she was able to get in and talk to the person who was detained. But again, it's the whole treatment of her staff that sent her into an outrage, right? And so by that evening, that's when she decided to call a press conference to,
And then what did she say that led to this accusation of attempting to or plotting to assassinate the president?
Well, specifically, she said that she had already talked to a hitman to kill the president, the president, his wife, the first lady, and the House Speaker, who's the cousin of the president, to kill all three of them if something happens to her, as in Sarah. Because Sarah was claiming that she she also has intel that there's a threat on her life, right? And so she said, I'd already talked to a hitman and told them if something happens to me to kill all three of them. No joke, no joke. That's verbatim what she said. And then afterwards, later on, when reporters would talk to her, she would deny that she made a threat. She said, that's not an active threat. That's just a conditional threat. It's conditional on something happening to me. And, in press conference, we would watch her and she would flat out deny that that was a threat. And, so in her mind, she didn't really threaten the president. In her mind, they're very much the victim in this whole story. So
It makes me think of an episode of The Sopranos. It's not a threat; it's a promise.
that's right. That's right. It's in how you spin it. It's not a threat. It's just words. That's not a threat. Mm.
So again, trying to understand how this is playing in the Philippine on the voters. Are they saying a pox from both your houses? Are they choosing sides? Is it based on regions or income levels or what?
So actually, before you answer that, Reggie, I'm gonna do a little tack on to that, because one of your colleagues there in the Manila-based media, commentator named Richard Tadarian, whom you've had him on your show. We've had him on our show. I've been on his show, so this is very incestuous here. Richard got into a little bit of hot water when he was answering a question to a foreign press outlet, and he said, "I come from the north of the country, where our Human Development Index is almost at the level of Southern Europe, but if you go to Mindanao, the Human Development Index is at a sub-Saharan African level." Now, he has since walked back from that a bit and apologized for how it sounded, but obviously this made a lot of people very upset. And I guess where I want to go with Jim's question is, this feels very much like a Manila elites versus the country bumpkins out there in the sticks who we sort of look down our nose at. And that, by the way, we know something about that here in the United States. I mean, the same kinds of things. We talk about the coastal elite and the so, I mean, is this what we're looking at? And is this, are the Dutertes kind of the vanguard of the common people who are tired of being run over by the elites?
Excuse me. That's a difficult question to answer, and certainly there's echoes of that, in current events. Yeah, Richard, huh? So he really put his foot in his mouth there. To be, I mean, to be,
talk for a living, that's an occupational hazard, right?
that's true. But to be fair to him as well, it was just he had like 5 minutes on CNN, right? And I don't know how long it was, but he had to speak fast, and so I guess that he was grasping at straws at that point. Yes, there are echoes of this being an elite versus the provincial people, that kind of class tension playing out. But that's been the nature of their cult, right? It's the Marcos has always been from the north. They grew up in the lap of luxury. They're aristocratic people. They hobnob. They socialize with diplomats and dignitaries and all of that. And it's always been that. And so nothing's changed when you think about it, right? The people that are supporting Duterte are still very much from the southern island of Mindanao, which has seen improving human development index. I'm not sure how accurate Richard's figures are. But of course, there's still very much a regional tension to this. What's also interesting is when you look at there have been some protests and gatherings overseas in support of Duterte, which haven't been that huge, but there's pockets of support for him still. What I will say that's interesting is Duterte came to power by an overwhelming vote, by an overwhelming mandate in 2016. A lot of the people that voted for him just wanted change. right? So it's not necessarily that, okay, he had a solid block of votes from his hometown province, but also a lot of the votes came from the north. A lot of the votes came from the educated class, from the upper middle class, from the elites, and so on and so forth, because they just wanted, because they bought into the whole promise of cracking down on the public order for and his public order promise and cracking down on drugs and other menace to society, and they bought into the narrative that look what he's done with Davao, maybe he can do the same for the rest of the country, right? So that was the narrative back then. And I mean, it's a beautiful promise, right? Who wouldn't buy into it, right? The Philippines has had a long line of democratic leaders, and I remember the thinking at that point, and I had just moved back to the country then, so I found it all interesting, was that the thinking back then was maybe we need a strong man now at this point in time, right? Look at what happened to Singapore. They had Lee Kuan Yew. They turned it around within a generation, and now they're a first world country. So it was that kind of thinking. Fast forward to today, a lot of the people I think that voted for him back then are regretting it. Right. So there's still support for him, but I believe there's a bit of buyer's remorse um over you know the buying into the whole narrative that Duterte could fix the country by starting with by first killing the problem on drugs, on illegal drugs, which every country has that problem, but I don't think at that point in time it was the biggest issue, is what I would say.
All right, let's go ahead to the election. So Bongbong Marcos can't run for re-election. Let's assume Sara Duterte beats the rap and is not impeached. So you would expect her to run. Is there anyone who could run against her and have a hope to win?
Will she beat the rap?
Well, that's
Yeah.
so
No,
that's,
I know we have to explore every possibility. Yes, you're right, but at this point in time, it doesn't look good for them. They're backed into a corner, and politically they become pariahs as well. Again, it's stunning the fall from grace, how they went from being the most powerful family and everyone currying for their favor and everyone kissing the ring and all of that, to now where even some of the politicians that showed support for them when they were in power just gone quiet, missing in action. um I don't know. At this point, at the start of the Marcos administration, there was talk of uh, changing the form of government to more of a parliamentary one. In which case, his cousin, the House Speaker Martin Romualdez, could become prime minister potentially. But we're halfway through his term. I don't think that's going to happen anymore with everything else that's on their plate. Um, and the only other contenders would be the Tulfo brothers, which they're broadcasters, right? They're huge following and popularity among the ordinary people. Um, and they're leading the polls. They're always at the top of the surveys. So they haven't declared any intention to run, but as with these things, you won't really know till the end.
Well, a lot of historical lessons come to mind. Some of them from the United States, in terms of
Yeah.
People who were once pariahs.
Choosing.
In fact,
Yeah.
the Marcos name was once kind of a pariah name, right? I mean, I first went to the Philippines in 1988, 2 years after his father was airlifted out of the country to keep in the middle of the people power revolution. So and then of course there was a time in early 2021 when Donald Trump was thought to be political toast, and obviously that's not the case. So
He came back from the dead. I couldn't
time.
believe it. I couldn't believe it as well.
So
every day is Easter.
So that brings us to, these upcoming midterm elections will be a real pulse check, won't they? I mean, they'll basically tell the country what the people really think, because polls can be wrong. We may find out that the people have a very different view than everybody thought they did. And so if the people who are more loyal to the Duterte side of things or less on board with the government's viewpoint do it surprisingly well, that perhaps she may beat the rap, right?
Yeah, yeah, perhaps. Um, there's just two names that are so far, can be qualified as real contenders at this point for the Senate. The others, to be honest, are so far behind that we
Two
just
names associated with the Duterte group, you mean?
right, yeah, two names
Okay.
associated with them that are real contenders at this point, and the others, they're just so far behind that you wouldn't think they stood a chance. And yes, you're right. Polls have gotten it wrong. We got it wrong. We got it very much wrong with the second coming of Donald Trump. I remember in the weeks leading up to your elections, we were covering it as well, and we were going with, I don't remember if it was Ipsos or so we subscribe to Reuters, right? And Reuters uses a particular pollster, and I just don't remember the name. In any case, I tell you the things that the way that we would describe the election would be like, oh, it's going to be so tight. The margins are going to be so tight. It might take several days because some states might contest it. Kamala Harris was leading very much. Leading in some of the swing states at that point. It was going to be so and so on and so forth. So the point being that the polls were calling it a very, very tight race, and it was not, right? So we got that hugely wrong. In the Philippines, yes, you're right. There's every chance that that could happen. I haven't seen it happen yet, though. And I think maybe that's because most of the people, the vast majority of the people sort of, I guess, vote within their party lines, right? If you're from Mindanao, I guess people vote for your politicians there. There's not a lot of people who can be swayed otherwise. And then don't forget the religious bloc, right? They've got their own bloc voters. Um, and
Just I was going to remind you that the night before the polls came out in America, I was on your show
oh,
in
that's right.
New
That's right.
York
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as a little bit of a commentator, and I was scared to death to call it either way. I wasn't quite sure. So,
But
Well
did you at that point? Yes, he was very careful. You were trying our best to extract a real answer out of him, but he was like, "I'm sitting on the fence, and that's it." But did you at that point, uh, now looking back in hindsight, feel that they could have gotten it wrong? Did you have a sense that the pollsters might have gotten it wrong?
I mean, I guess and I think Jim and I have been around long enough to know that the polls are usually either exactly right or significantly wrong. It's like it's you know 4 or 5 points wrong is not
Yeah.
uncommon. So and I remember the next day I was at an event, and it was during the closing of the polls on the East Coast. And as I was sitting up on the stage answering questions that had nothing to do with this, somebody asked me who was going to win the election, and my response was, "Do you have the latest results out of Georgia?" Right? Because my sense was, there were these swing states, and once you started to see how one would go, that was a pretty good indicator of how the polling error was going to work out. And so,
yeah, I mean, Ray and I were in Australia in 2019 when it was Morrison against Shorten, and every poll had Shorten winning. Everyone we spoke to said for sure, and then of course, Shorten lost to Morrison. So I think Ray and I were scarred enough from that never to take a position based on polls.
exactly.
So I encourage you to take that approach.
My lesson from that was to listen to other pollsters, right? So I actually started following them on X, on other social media platform, on Threads as well. And these are the polls, and there was one in particular, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention the name here, but that seemed to have gotten it, more or less 100% right, down to the swing states, right? And I thought, okay, that was my lesson there.
Yeah, and I think that, honestly, it's something like that happens every time, right? In fact, I think 2016 Trafalgar was like highly was sort of trumpeting the fact that it was the one that got it right in the U.S. 2016 election, and then they managed to sort of fritter that away in getting it wrong in years since. So voters tend to be right until they're wrong. They sort of marry themselves to whatever methodology, and then it doesn't work anymore. So, in fact, well, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole. So let's get you out of here on this. Let's talk a little bit about what this means from a geopolitical standpoint. Where Philippines.
Geopolitically, China is laughing, right? I mean, you've got your own stuff in the US. We've got our own shit to deal with. Oh, sorry. Am I allowed to curse on this?
Too late.
And we've just handed the keys to China, to the rest of Southeast Asia, I feel. I mean, you couldn't have, if I were Xi Jinping, you couldn't have asked for a better scenario, right? Unfortunately, war seems to have re-erupted in Gaza. Ukraine is, I don't know where those talks are going. And then again, domestically, you have a lot of issues in the United States. You're pulling out. I couldn't believe that they pulled out the funding for VOA and Radio Free Asia, which had been around for what, 60, 80 years.
Yep.
And the Global Times, Ray's best friend, was gloating about it, right? What did it call the Voice of America? Peddler of lies.
So just for our audience, the Global Times is one of the states, the China state English language news outlets, news
propaganda
outlets. Yeah,
that's right. Thank you, Jeff. That's
which, as Reggie indicates, does like to write the occasional Ray Powell love story. So
they love you. I don't know what you did to them, but they love you so much. But yes, well, they now just overnight they're gloating about the fact that the Voice of America has been defunded, and so again, when you look at it, for me, it feels like, okay, China has now has an opportune moment to try to, I don't know, not necessarily do something drastic like invade Taiwan, but to increase its soft power all across Asia and beyond, right? It's the prime time for them to send a message that, look at what all these Western ideals and institutions and ideologies have brought you guys. It's just caused a lot of chaos and ruin and war around the world. Yeah.
Just for everyone's sake, that's not your view. That's that's the view you believe that the Beijing is going to try to send out.
I have no lines into what Xi Jinping is planning, but certainly I feel like there's a lot of there's a big window of opportunity for them right now to try to deliver a different message.
All right, Reggie, so you are leaving the big story or have left the big story. What's next for you, and where can people tune in to watch what you're doing next?
I have left the big story. I'm on a political show called Story Con. It's a show that puts together all the editors of the network. It's on 4 p.m. every day on Manila time, and it basically deep dives into politics, current events. Well, these days that's 90% politics, and as well to some extent geopolitics. But so far we haven't had the space to even think about what's going on in the West Philippine Sea. Everything's just been all about either the impeachment or now the International Criminal Court trial. But yes, that's on One News, and I think they also stream that on YouTube and Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
All right. Well, best of luck with your new endeavors, and maybe I'll get to come on your show on your new show.
Yes, please. Yeah, you should. I mean, the timing doesn't work right now because it's in the afternoon Manila time. But yeah, you should definitely swing by next time you're in town, or if
All right.
you're whenever you're willing to stay up really late.
Yeah. No, I'm too old for that. All right. That's Reggie Lay. You should definitely tune into her program. Thanks again, Reggie, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ray. Thanks, Jim.
And once again, we want to give our shout out to our great sponsor, Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets, like the Philippines. Jim Caruso is a senior advisor with Bauer Group, and you can find them at their website, BauerGroupAsia.com.
Well, Ray, it's complex. I think that was a good description of the situation in the Philippines. Did Reggie unravel it for you?
Well, I will say, with the Philippines, like with the United States, part of and we've talked about this quite a bit in this discussion, is there are these totally different narratives that are told. And, I have relatives in Mindanao. I hear both. I hear both narratives. I hear the Manila narrative and I hear the Mindanao narrative. And never the twain shall meet. I mean, they're just very, very different. And some of them are different takes on the same facts. And of course, in some cases, they're completely different facts. And so, it is this really tough place that we are in, as globally in a lot of ways, which is, if you want to listen to a particular narrative, you can have that all day, every day, 7 days a week, and you will come away thinking a particular thing. And I think that's pretty much what's happening in the Philippines. If you are on Team Duterte, if you're on Team Marcos, you are hearing totally different things every day.
So no one knows what the truth is anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's basically the problem right now. I mean, we could talk about whether hopefully this has been coming at us for a while, right? I mean, it's been coming at since when I was young and there were 3 major networks, and of course when Jim was young there were no networks. Sorry, Jim, I just have to. I can't help myself.
I'll come back to you later.
So, but and of course, there are downsides to having limited number of networks. You do need that competitive, element to keep everybody on their toes. But now it's so fragmented that, if you want to listen to the, Why Ray Powell's a Bad Guy network of 24 hours a day, there's probably one of those. That's called the Global Times, by the way.
All right. So let me tell you my little story, or how I've been thinking about this. So, my father is Greek American. He used to go back to Greece a lot, lived there for a while. When I was 10 years old, there was a military coup. A bunch of colonels, your colonel, overthrew the government.
As we should.
And actually were welcomed by the populace, because the government of the day for years had been seen as corrupt, inefficient. Fistfights would break out in Parliament. And basically it was, let's start with a whole new slate.
No.
And I fear sometimes in democracies, as we get tired of the push and pull, and there's no common narrative, that happens. Of course, a few years later, they were kicked out and bad things happened. But
so I mean, it brings us back to the point that, and we're going through this right now in the United States, which is, when you look at the world and you see particular problems and you just want somebody who will go and sweep everything aside, and frankly, the rules are part of the problem in your mind, right? So they've made it too hard to change things. And we know what needs to be changed, so we just need to get in there and do it, and let God sort it out, right? The thing is, though, in a democracy, the process really, really super important. In America, we have this whole thing that we call the balance of power. And the reason that we put all of these things, these complicated rules together, was because we were afraid what would happen with unchecked power. And everyone who gloats about unchecked power when their person is in charge is on the exact opposite foot when the other person is in charge. And so, all of so I'm taken back in the United States to when, during some fights over judges, the Democratic leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, decided, okay, well, let's just do away with this filibuster as it applies to judges. And the Republican minority leader, who was then Mitch McConnell, said literally, you will rue the day. And of course, what happens is later on, the Republicans are in charge and they get all their judges, plus they get a bunch of Supreme Court justices. And so when you decide that, it's your turn and you're going to sort of do away with some kind of process that protects the rights of the minority, you've got the tunnel vision. You think that you'll always be in charge, or you don't care what happens to whoever comes in the future because you need to get yours now.
Inefficiency is a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. And it's a shocking thing to believe. And everybody who has sort of fantasized about going in and fixing the government wishes they could be dictator for a day and just fix everything and then put all the safeguards back in place afterwards. But it just, unfortunately, democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else that's been tried.
Thank you, Mr. Churchill.
You're welcome. All right. So Mr. Churchill is not our producer. Our producer is Ian Ellis Jones, whom you can follow on X at IanEllisJones.com. No, that's not X. At IanEllisJones.nothing. He does those great military and political graphics, geopolitical graphics. Meanwhile, if you are watching us, then you can also listen to us on your favorite audio podcast streaming service, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever that is. If you're listening to us and want to see what we look like, go over to YouTube at IP Podcast. Finally, you can email us, Indo-Pacific-podcast@gmail.com, Indo-Pacific-podcast@gmail.com. I will tell you now that at least 2 people who have emailed us asking for specific guests will soon be satisfied that we have actually had one of the interviews already, and we'll air it soon. And we are going to interview the other one almost, I believe, tomorrow. So it's if you have great ideas of people that we should interview, send those to us. Finally, we want to thank our sponsors, Bauer Group Asia. Go over there if you're doing business in Asia. You might need a guide, and if you need a guide, Bauer Group Asia is the best. That's it for Ian, for James. For Raymond, that's us. Why should we care about the Indo-Pacific? Talk to you next time.